Some lives never escape the cycle of struggle. They work, they save, they plan, yet wealth drifts away silently, not because of laziness, not because of fate, but because of truths no one ever teaches, and one may already be shaping your future. Most people imagine poverty as the result of circumstance, a bad economy, a lack of opportunity, unfair systems. These are comforting explanations. They allow a person to blame the outside world, to nod at their struggles, and feel that someday, somehow, life will change once conditions improve. But the real cause is far quieter and far more dangerous. It begins in the mind, invisible, unseen, yet present in every decision you make. Napoleon Hill discovered this while studying the most powerful builders of wealth in history. People like Rockefeller, Carnegie, Ford, Edison, they did not allow circumstance to dictate their future. They recognized a deeper, invisible force operating inside everyone, whether acknowledged or ignored. That force is thought, not simply thinking, not daydreams or idle reflections, but repeated, undisciplined thought, the kind most people never monitor. Consider this carefully. The average person drifts through ideas without scrutiny. They repeat fear disguised as caution. They rehearse limitation as if it were truth. I'll never earn enough. People like me don't get ahead. I'm not ready yet. These are harmless thoughts, right? Only if you want poverty, because thoughts are not neutral. They shape belief. Belief shapes behavior. Behavior shapes results. Repeated thoughts create identity, and identity determines everything. The person you become quietly obeys the instructions you feed your subconscious. Now observe the pattern. A hard-working individual may labor tirelessly. They may save diligently. They may even study wealth building. Yet their repeated internal dialogue undermines action at every step. It delays decisions. It erodes risk tolerance. It instructs the mind to accept small rewards instead of demanding more. The result is predictably quiet. Wealth never accumulates. Opportunities slip past unnoticed. Potential remains latent. This is why so many people live in constant frustration. They work hard, they hope, they wait, and yet the life they imagine never appears. The uncomfortable truth is this: most poverty is self-perpetuating, not through lack of skill, not through lack of effort, but through obedience to unexamined thoughts that whisper limitation repeatedly until the mind treats them as fact. Now consider the danger lurking here. Thoughts disguised as common sense are the most effective enemies. They do not shout. They do not provoke resistance. They arrive quietly, dressed as caution, practicality, or reasonableness. Maybe I shouldn't risk it. Better to be safe than sorry. I'll start tomorrow. These are harmless until repeated. Then they form belief. Then behavior obeys. Then results confirm the belief. Napoleon Hill called this drifting. It is not laziness. It is unconscious obedience to mental commands you never deliberately issued. The drifting mind works tirelessly, but always within invisible limits. Limits it has learned to accept as true. And once these limits are internalized, the cycle is complete. Most people never recognize it. They do not see the enemy inside their own mind. They continue working, hoping, yet following the instructions fear has been feeding them quietly for years. Pause for a moment and ask yourself, how often have you wanted more? How often have you sought opportunity, and yet hesitated, delayed, settled for less? The answer is likely more frequent than you realize, because the mind obeys repeated instruction automatically, without awareness, without debate. Even the most diligent work cannot overcome this invisible force, and that is why most people remain poor, quietly, year after year, not through laziness, not through incompetence, but because the mind has been unconsciously trained to accept limitation as reality. And until this truth is confronted, until the internal commands are recognized and challenged, no external action will permanently change the result. Now a question begins to emerge that most people dread. If this is true, then what have you been feeding your mind all these years? The enemy is closer than most people realize. It does not wear a uniform. It does not announce itself. It rarely appears in the form of a competitor, a boss, or a government. It is fear. But fear is rarely obvious. It arrives as reason, as practicality, as the responsible voice inside the mind. Don't risk it. Better be careful. Maybe now is not the right time. Those thoughts sound wise, they sound mature, they feel protective, and that is precisely why they are dangerous, because the mind accepts them without question. And once accepted, they begin forming belief. Repeated belief becomes instruction. Instruction guides behavior. Behavior produces results. Results confirm belief. This is the quiet cycle that keeps the majority trapped in poverty. Notice how subtle it is. A person works hard, studies diligently, seeks opportunity, and yet hesitation arises at every critical moment. Doubt creeps in when ambition demands risk. Procrastination masks itself as preparation. From the outside, the behavior seems reasonable. From the inside, it is obedience. Obedience to thoughts that limit potential. Napoleon Hill observed this in every successful figure he studied. The difference between the wealthy and the drifting is not always effort. It is the ability to recognize fear disguised as reason, to refuse it authority, to guard thought deliberately. Now let us examine a familiar companion of fear, procrastination. Most people mistake procrastination for laziness or poor time management. It is neither. Procrastination is identity protection. The mind delays action when a required step threatens the self-image it has constructed, becoming more competent, visible, responsible, exposed to criticism. The subconscious mind resists transformation. It prefers comfort, even when comfort guarantees stagnation. This is why opportunity slips away silently. Plans are made, ambitions rise, and then hesitation intervenes. Months pass, years pass. The person explains the outcome with external reasons. Timing wasn't right, the market was bad, I just didn't have the resources. But the truth is invisible. The mind, the very organ designed to guide decisions, has been hijacked, not by circumstance, not by lack of skill, but by repeated thoughts that whisper limitation and instruct hesitation. Fear and procrastination are the invisible architects of poverty. They are so effective because they disguise themselves as reason. They never feel like enemies, and until they are recognized, the cycle repeats. Most people never see this pattern. They never notice how their internal dialogue quietly predicts failure. They never realize that unguarded thought becomes obedient behavior. And here is the most unsettling part. Even extraordinary effort cannot overcome these internal commands. A person may work tirelessly, sacrifice relentlessly, and persist for years, yet the mind's silent instructions maintain the limits of their achievement. Now consider this carefully. If fear instructs thought, if thought instructs behavior, then your current results are not random. They are the inevitable outcome of repeated, unexamined thinking. This is why the rich guard their thoughts with almost ritual discipline, because one repeated thought, left unchecked, can grow into a belief capable of controlling an entire life. They understand something the drifting mind never does. Success is not only about action, it is about command over thought, command over the beliefs that guide behavior. And this command is not optional, it is necessary, because the enemy will never stop presenting itself. It is patient, persistent, subtle, and invisible to most. This is the enemy that keeps the majority poor, not circumstance, not laziness, not luck, but fear disguised as reason, procrastination disguised as preparation, and unguarded thought disguised as harmless reflection. And until you recognize this, you will continue obeying a set of internal instructions that guarantees limited results. Now ask yourself quietly, who has been instructing your mind all these years? Was it you, or was it fear disguised as reason? And once you see the answer clearly, you are forced to confront a question most avoid. If your current results are the consequence of unexamined thought, then what deliberate thought must you begin cultivating today to escape this cycle? At some point, the truth becomes unavoidable. You can no longer hide behind excuses. You can no longer blame circumstance, luck, or timing. You begin seeing the pattern with painful clarity. Effort alone does not change results. Sacrifice alone does not create wealth. Persistence alone does not guarantee freedom. The missing piece is thought. The unexamined, undisciplined thoughts that have quietly instructed your mind for years. At first, the recognition feels almost subtle. You notice hesitation. You notice doubt. You notice how fear surfaces whenever opportunity requires risk. It is familiar, comforting even, because it justifies why action was delayed, why ambition faltered, why you accepted less than you wanted. But now the cycle cannot be ignored. You see it forming a clear chain. Repeated thought, belief, behavior, result. Every failed effort, every missed opportunity, every delayed action, all of it obeys this law, quietly and perfectly. And with that realization comes a dangerous awareness. If thought has been shaping identity all along, then your current self is not accidental. It is the predictable outcome of obeying fear disguised as reason. The midpoint of your life begins to feel like a crossroads. You can continue as before, allowing drifting to remain invisible, obeying repeated instructions that ensure the same results year after year. Or you can step across an invisible line. This line is not dramatic. It does not arrive with fanfare. It feels uncomfortable, even frightening, because crossing it requires complete honesty, complete responsibility, and an absolute refusal to let fear continue issuing commands. This is the break point. Before it, you obey the instructions of old fear. After it, fear no longer dictates your behavior. After it, thought begins to be deliberate. Identity begins to be chosen rather than inherited from habit. Napoleon Hill observed this moment in the lives of all powerful figures he studied. Henry Ford had already defined his identity as a creator of affordable automobiles long before critics laughed. Thomas Edison had already chosen the identity of inventor long before his experiments succeeded. Andrew Carnegie had already constructed the mental framework of industrial leadership long before wealth accumulated. The difference between those who drift and those who rise is this: the breakpoint forces recognition. It dissolves external blame. It removes comfort from excuses. Once you see it clearly, hesitation is no longer defensible. Doubt loses authority. Procrastination becomes intolerable. And here is the most unsettling part. Crossing the breakpoint does not feel victorious. It feels like exposure, like naked truth. Because suddenly you see how much of your life was quietly guided by forces you allowed into your mind. The decisions you once believed were conscious, were obedient. The actions you believed were bold, were controlled by fear. The results you blamed on circumstance were predicted by your own repeated thoughts. At this point, the mind faces a confrontation it cannot escape. Will you continue obeying the instructions of fear, or will you take command? Most people retreat here. They return to old habits. They cling to drifting because the familiar feels safer than transformation. But those who cross the line begin to see a different reality. They realize that thoughts can be trained, beliefs can be rewritten, identity itself can be reconstructed. And once reconstruction begins, fear loses its grip. Hesitation is no longer automatic. Procrastination loses justification. Ambition becomes inevitable. This is the point where a deliberate replacement of thought must begin. But before that replacement is fully understood, one question looms. If your identity has been built from years of unguarded thoughts, how do you begin reshaping it deliberately? Once the break point is crossed, a strange clarity arrives. Not comfort, not relief, just recognition. The old patterns no longer serve. The mind can no longer hide behind excuses or rationalizations. Every thought that has reinforced limitation now stands exposed. This emptiness is dangerous. Most retreat, most cling to drifting, because deliberate transformation feels heavy. But those who move forward begin constructing a replacement. This is not hope. This is not optimism. It is deliberate mental architecture, a framework where thought, belief, and identity are aligned on purpose. The first foundation is definiteness of purpose, not vague ambition, not "I want to be rich someday." A clearly defined goal, specific and compelling. Every action must orbit this purpose. Every decision must reinforce it. Without definiteness, drifting silently returns. The mind begins obeying old patterns again. Fear regains authority. Procrastination finds justification. Next comes faith. Faith is not naive hope. It is trained certainty. It comes from deliberate repetition of autosuggestion, thoughts repeated with intensity until the subconscious accepts them as truth. Most people practice autosuggestion unknowingly, rehearsing fear. "I can't do this. I'm not ready. I'll fail again." These repeated statements become invisible commands. They instruct hesitation. They reinforce limitation. Faith reverses this process. It commands the mind to obey purposeful instruction. It reprograms identity. It tells the subconscious, "This is who you are. This is what you do." But purpose and faith alone are insufficient. The third layer is association through the mastermind principle. Even extraordinary individuals surrounded themselves with aligned thinkers. Carnegie, Edison, Ford. They did not operate in isolation. They understood that belief amplified by others strengthens mental alignment. Ideas expand faster. Decisions gain clarity. Fear loses its grip more quickly. Finally, self-discipline executes the plan. Discipline is choice, a deliberate decision to act in alignment with purpose, regardless of fear. Not once in a while, not only when motivated, consistently, relentlessly. The combination of these forces, purpose, faith, aligned association, and discipline, creates a mind that obeys deliberate instruction. Fear no longer issues commands. Hesitation becomes measurable. Procrastination loses shelter. The replacement has a subtle but profound effect. The law of attraction, as most misunderstand it, responds not to luck or wishful thinking, but to alignment, to a mind whose internal identity is coherent, disciplined, and purposeful, to a person whose thoughts, beliefs, and actions operate in harmony. Opportunities no longer appear random. Allies are no longer coincidental. Results follow naturally. Influence grows quietly, but powerfully. And yet, even now, vigilance is required. Thoughts must be guarded constantly. Drifting can return during fatigue or distraction. Fear will always test the mind. But the individual who has built the replacement recognizes the signs immediately. Hesitation becomes visible. Doubt becomes audible. Procrastination becomes intolerable. And deliberate action restores alignment. This is the hidden mastery most people never achieve. Quiet, invisible, unstoppable, because when thoughts are replaced deliberately, when identity is reconstructed consciously, fear loses its authority permanently. Action becomes natural. Ambition becomes inevitable. And from this moment, a new law governs life. The inner self directs the outer world.
The disciplined mind attracts aligned results. The reconstructed identity dictates influence, opportunity, and wealth. But even here, one question remains. How do you maintain this alignment every day against fatigue, distraction, and temptation to drift back? Once alignment is established, something remarkable begins. It is not loud, it is not dramatic, it is quiet. You begin operating from a place where thought, identity, and action are fully synchronized, where hesitation is rare, where procrastination has no justification, where ambition is inevitable. This is the stage few ever reach. Most people imagine wealth, success, or influence as external, something acquired, something measured, something dependent on luck, connections, or timing. But true mastery is the opposite. It begins internally. It begins in the mind, a mind that has been guarded, a mind that has been trained deliberately, a mind whose beliefs, purpose, and discipline are aligned. At this point, the law of attraction no longer feels mystical. It is precise. It is predictable. It responds to the internal alignment of thought and identity. Opportunities appear consistently. Allies converge naturally.
Results flow as a reflection of internal order. Notice the subtlety. The world does not bend dramatically. Nothing shouts or demands recognition. It simply mirrors your inner framework. Napoleon Hill studied individuals who achieved this state. Carnegie, Edison, Ford, their wealth and influence were not accidents. They were mirrors of a disciplined, aligned mind, a mind that had learned to guard thought, to refuse fear authority, to act deliberately and consistently. And now consider something few see clearly. Quiet power does not seek attention. It does not advertise. It simply operates. It influences silently. It attracts without forcing. The difference between someone drifting and someone aligned becomes obvious only in retrospect. The drifting person struggles with every opportunity. They hesitate, doubt, and retreat. Results are inconsistent. Effort never equals outcome. The aligned mind, however, moves differently. Decisions are precise. Action is decisive. Momentum builds internally, then manifests externally. This is why guarding thought is the most critical discipline anyone can practice. Not for motivation, not for optimism, but because the mind shapes identity, and identity commands the results you experience. Fear loses authority permanently. Procrastination has no shelter. Ambition becomes inevitable. And in this quiet power, wealth is no longer external. It is a reflection, a mirror, a byproduct of internal mastery. At this stage, questions like, will I succeed, vanish. They are replaced by a calm internal certainty. What is the next deliberate step? Each action now aligns with purpose, faith, and discipline. Each decision reinforces identity. Each obstacle becomes a test, not a barrier. The quiet power is permanent, not because the world changes, but because you have changed. The mind that once obeyed fear now obeys deliberate instruction. The identity that once drifted now commands the life it was meant to lead. And here is the final truth few ever grasp. No circumstance can overpower this alignment. No obstacle can derail it. No critic can diminish it. Because the internal architecture of thought, belief, and action has become self-reinforcing. You are no longer drifting. You are deliberate. You are aligned. You are quietly powerful. And the forces that once kept most people poor are now powerless against you. This is the ultimate mastery of thought, the ultimate command of identity, the hidden law that governs wealth, influence, and freedom. It is quiet. It is invisible. It is unstoppable, because the life you experience now follows the identity you have chosen deliberately. And that identity cannot be ignored. The dark truth is no longer your master. You are.